Hello and welcome. What's going through the Muslim mind? How much do we know about the attitudes of ordinary Muslims towards America, democracy or Al-Qaeda? A comprehensive poll just released today attempts to find out, surveying a broad range of Muslims from Nigeria to Indonesia. Besides a profound opposition to the presence of the US military in the Muslim world, the survey found that large majorities of those polled approve of attacks on US troops if they are in Muslim countries, although most people disapprove of attacks on civilians. The poll was conducted last summer and just released by the American research organization worldpublicopinion.org. One of the other findings of the poll was that while Al-Qaeda claims to be fighting against the US military presence in the Muslim world, Muslims generally don't agree with the group's methods. Today we'll look at the poll's results and ask, what do Muslims want? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part, and of course we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Well, joining me is Dr. Stephen Cull, a political psychologist who studies world public opinion on international issues. He is the director of the program on international policy attitudes and worldpublicopinion.org, which conducted that survey released today. Also with us is Dr. Radwan Masmoudi, the founder and president of the Center of the Study of Islam and Democracy, a Washington-based organization promoting freedom and good governance in the Muslim world. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, both of you.
Good to be with you, Idris.
Dr. Cull, if I can start with you, sir, and ask you about some of these results. To many people, they would seem quite disturbing. And I give an example here with one of the results here: attacks on U.S. troops. A large majority of Muslims in the Arab world, at least in the Arab world, I should say, approve of attacks on U.S. troops if they're based in Muslim countries. Were you surprised by this?
Well, there are a number of countries where you have majorities. Egypt, for example, Jordan. But in Indonesia and Pakistan, it is more divided and actually leans a little in the negative direction. But yes, people in the Muslim world feel that the troops that the U.S. has in the region, the military forces, are hostile, that they threaten the people in the Muslim world, and they support Al-Qaeda's goal of getting those troops out of the Muslim world.
We see some of the results there going on the screen as you describe it now. We had an email, if I could put this to you please, Dr. Cull. This is from Faisal Dama in the United Kingdom. And Faisal says, when Muslims witness Muslims being killed on their own land for no justifiable reason in Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia and other places, how can they want attacks on US forces to end? As more people turn radical as a result of these American adventures, these problems will only get worse. And I noticed, as you mentioned, it's interesting that in non-Arab Muslim countries such as Indonesia, which is the world's most populous Muslim nation, there was far less support of this action. Now, was there any analysis for why this split took place?
Well, it turns out that people who are closer to the Arab world, closer to the Israeli-Palestinian region, that is, the people there are the most negative, feel the strongest about wanting U.S. forces out of the region, and are more identified with a sense of being under attack by Israel and with the U.S. behind it, and then this gets turned toward the U.S. in general.
Dr. Masmoudi, good to have you here as well.
Thank you.
You know, there was a time when the negative attitude towards the US was largely towards like the US government and not so much towards the people. Now we got the results from the poll on American people, you know, and the view on American people here. It seems that that's changed according to this poll, and that there's an overall negative view of Americans in general in most Muslim nations. Why is that, do you think?
I would think that the main reason for that is the unpopularity of the previous administration. President Bush was very unpopular in the Arab and Muslim world, and the fact that he was elected not only once but twice after the war in Iraq, a lot of Arabs and Muslims say therefore the people elected him, therefore they approve of this policy. But I would venture to say that it probably has changed now with the election of President Obama, because President Obama is obviously was very critical of those policies.
Interesting you say that, because that was what I was going to ask you, and a question has come in by email from Farhana Sayed, who says, these surveys were conducted before the US election. Does the organization plan fresh surveys since there's been a change in the administration? The new president has been warmly welcomed by most Muslim countries, and the public opinion is likely to reflect this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think President Obama is very popular, although there is a wait-and-see attitude also in the Muslim world to see what exactly he will be able to change in U.S. foreign policy toward Israel, toward Iraq, toward Afghanistan.
We did some polling for BBC more recently, and there is some optimism that Obama can make relations better. However, at this point, views of the U.S. have not turned positive. They've moved marginally more positive, particularly in Egypt, but they're still predominantly negative. There's a wait-and-see attitude, but Obama has given them some sense of hope.
It's early days, I guess. But one interesting point here from your survey as well, there's the view on attacks on civilians. And the results on the attacks on civilians is very interesting. It's very clear that Muslims across the globe seem to universally reject the use of violence against civilians in the US. And I guess I'm wondering, is this because there's a feeling that attacks on civilians in the US won't really change anything? Or is this genuinely because those polled genuinely feel that violence is wrong?
I think it's a moral issue, that they think it's morally wrong to do so. And there are doubts also about whether they are effective.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the Muslim world supporting Al-Qaeda, Dr. Masmoudi, there's the views on Al-Qaeda, which is interesting as well, and we'll look at those results in a second. The results show very low support all round for Muslim world supporting Al-Qaeda. We had an email that came in from the USA on the subject, or at least that touches on this. It came from Lesa in California in the USA. No one, whether they are a believer or not, would say that the ideas of Al-Qaeda are something to strive for, because as long as you're murdering people you've never tried in court and who are innocent, as long as you kill people for the sake of gaining power, you will lose.
Well, I think that in general people distinguish between the goals of Al-Qaeda and the tactics of Al-Qaeda. They might agree with many of the goals of Al-Qaeda, which is, for example, to get to end the occupation or to get US troops out of Muslim lands. But in general, they disagree with the tactics. And I think it's, as Steve said, on moral grounds that Islam does not allow the killing of innocent civilians no matter what. And I think many religious scholars have spoken very strongly against it. And don't forget that Muslims are also victims of terrorism, and that we feel that.
And that's an interesting point, Dr. Khalil, that actually Al-Qaeda became more or less a sort of ideology, with people copying the Al-Qaeda ideology or principles in places such as Indonesia and across parts of the Muslim world, which were quite remote from the Arab world as well.
Yes.
Was that reflected in the support or a lack of support for Al-Qaeda?
Well, throughout the Muslim world, there's this divided feeling, as was just mentioned, support for many of the goals, discomfort with the methods, and you find that throughout. You do have voices in Indonesia, Jemaah Islamiyah, who make some of the same arguments, but in general in Indonesia you have a more moderate tone and less support for aggressive methods to pursue these goals.
I'll get another email here, Dr. Masmoudi. Perhaps I could put this to you. This email came from Yemen, from Aden, and Jim from there says, "No Muslim believes the US wants democracy for them. We have seen what has happened to the democratically elected Hamas in Gaza. For Bush, Islamic democracy was terrorism and the Arab autocrats were friends." Now I wonder, how strong do you believe that feeling of hypocrisy to be on the part of the on the West, that they will impose a democracy, but if it's an Arab-style democracy, that it's unsuitable?
Yeah, I think it's very strong feeling in the Arab world that the United States is not really serious about promoting democracy in the Arab world, and that it talks about democracy, but in fact it is supporting oppressive regimes and corrupt regimes in most of the Arab world and most of the Muslim world. And I think this is at the heart, actually, of the terrorism problem in the Arab and in the Muslim world. People want to see change. People are very dissatisfied with the status quo and with the political systems that they have in place. When they try the democratic means or the democratic process, they find it blocked. The governments don't let them participate, and with the support of the US and Europe, they find that those roads are closed. And that is, then they turn to violence, and some of them turn to Al-Qaeda and other groups, because they say democracy will never work. They will never let you win an election, or they'll never recognize you if you do win an election. And of course, we remember what happened in Algeria in 1992. That there was a coup against an elected government, basically, in Algeria. And I think that's the root cause of the growth of terrorism in the 90s and the early new century.
We asked about this in the poll, and only a minority think that the U.S. opposes democracy, but the dominant attitude is the U.S. only supports democracy when the government is supportive of U.S. goals in the region. And thus there is this perception that the U.S. is hypocritical, that it doesn't always live up to the values that it promotes. But few think that the U.S. is simply opposed to democracy in the region.
Sure. We've got a call on the line from Florida. Ray, thanks for your patience. What would you like to ask?
I have a comment regarding President Obama. I think President Obama is the biggest sham ever been fed to the people of the world and American people. His policy, his attitude toward Middle East, toward occupying the state of Israel and rightful nation of Palestine haven't changed. His policy toward withdrawing the troop out of Iraq.
So Ray, you think it's pretty much the same as before, as under President Bush?
Even worse than before,
okay.
But they are mistaken because people of the world, they are more aware. They are day by day, they realize what is being done. And President Obama's recent speech last night, it represents that people will stay in Iraq. The Guantanamo Bay will not be closed till another, God knows, 2 years, which Bush would do it probably even
Ray,
earlier.
because we're going to be taking a break, let me get Dr. Cole to give a very quick response to this. You said there was a sense of optimism, though, under President Obama.
That's right. There is a sense that it could change. I think there's a sense that maybe his heart's in the right place, but there's also a perception that he doesn't have control over everything, that there are a lot of forces in the U.S. that, like various lobbies, the Israeli lobby and so on, that could have a significant effect on policies, even if he has such aspirations. But there is some hope that he is going to bring about some change. So your callers.
I was going to say that's an unusual view. It's an unusual view, actually. I was going to say, and there's been a lot of expectation there. We're going to take a very short break here now. More of our discussion in a moment. As we pause, let me remind you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. The debate's taking place there right now, as you'll see, and we'll be right back.